Let me challenge the way you think about money. Not how much you have, but what you believe it actually is. Because most people spend their entire lives interacting with money without ever understanding it. They earn it, they spend it, they worry about it, they chase it, but very few ever stop and ask a deeper question. What exactly is money? Is it just paper? Numbers on a screen? A reward for working hard? Or is it something else entirely? Now here is something that might surprise you. There are people who earn a lot and still feel stuck. And there are others who earn less, but somehow keep growing. So what creates that difference? It's not luck. It's not background. And it's not even opportunity alone. It's understanding. Because money does not behave the same way for everyone. It responds differently depending on how you think, how you decide, and how you act over time. And if you misunderstand it, even slightly, you can spend years moving in the wrong direction without realizing it. So before you try to make more money, before you look for new opportunities, there is one thing you need to fix first. The way you see it, because here's the truth most people never hear. Money is not complicated, but the way people approach it is. Small misunderstandings create big consequences over time. And those consequences are often invisible at the beginning. So instead of starting with strategies or shortcuts, let's start somewhere more important. Let's break down the way money actually works. From the ground up, most people treat money like an object, something you collect, something you store, something you use when needed. But that way of thinking is incomplete. Money is not just something you hold. It is something that moves. It flows between people, decisions, and systems. And once you understand that everything changes, let's say two individuals receive the same amount. One uses it without structure. The other uses it with intention. After some time, their outcomes will look completely different. Not because of the amount they started with, but because of how they interacted with it. This is where most people go wrong. They focus on the amount instead of the behavior behind it. But money is not controlled by how much you have. It is shaped by how you handle what you have now. Consider this. Imagine someone who increases their income. At first, it feels like progress. More options, more flexibility, more confidence. But then something subtle begins to happen. Their standard of living rises. Expenses expand. Expectations grow. And without noticing, the financial position stays almost the same. Different numbers, same pressure. Why does this happen? Because income alone does not create stability. Structure does. If there is no system behind your money, growth in income simply increases complexity. And complexity without control leads to instability. So the goal is not just to earn more. It is to build a system that can sustain and organize what you earn. Here is a perspective most people ignore. Money is deeply connected to decision-making. Every financial outcome is the result of a series of choices. Some are obvious, others are subtle, and over time, those choices compound. A small decision today can create a large impact later. But because the effect is delayed, people underestimate its importance. They focus on big moments while ignoring daily patterns. It is those patterns that shape long-term results. So if you want to understand money, start by observing your decisions. Not once, but consistently, because money follows patterns, not intentions. Consider a situation that is more common than most people realize. An individual reaches a point where income is no longer the main concern. Bills are paid, basic needs are covered, and there is a sense of stability. At this stage, many people assume the difficult part is over. But in reality, this is where a different kind of challenge begins. Because once survival is no longer the focus, decision-making becomes more complex. Options increase. There are more choices to make, more directions to consider, and more consequences attached to each decision. Without a structured approach, these choices become overwhelming. And when choices become overwhelming, people simplify them in the wrong way. They rely on comfort. They rely on habit. They rely on what feels right in the moment. But financial outcomes are not shaped by what feels right. They are shaped by what is aligned with long-term direction. So even in a position that appears stable, a lack of structured thinking can quietly create instability beneath the surface. Now, let's examine what happens when pressure is introduced into that environment. Pressure does not always come from crisis. Sometimes it comes from opportunity, a new investment option, a business idea, a chance that promises accelerated results. These moments are often misunderstood. They appear as breakthroughs, but they are actually tests. Tests of judgment, tests of patience, tests of awareness. Without a clear framework for evaluation, decisions become reactive. Instead of asking, does this align with my long-term direction? People ask, what can I gain quickly? That single shift in thinking changes everything. Because when decisions are driven by immediate gain, risk is often underestimated. And when risk is underestimated, consequences are magnified. This is how individuals who appear financially stable can suddenly face unexpected setbacks, not due to lack of effort, but due to misaligned decision-making under pressure. There's another layer to this that is rarely discussed. Financial behavior is influenced by perception, not reality, but perception. If someone perceives themselves as being in a strong position, they may become less cautious. If they perceive an opportunity as rare, they may become more aggressive. And in both cases, perception shapes action. But perception is not always accurate. It is influenced by past experiences, external opinions, and emotional states, which means decisions are often made on unstable foundations. This creates inconsistency, and inconsistency leads to unpredictable outcomes. To avoid this, one must separate perception from analysis, not asking, how do I feel about this? But asking, what does this actually represent? That shift alone can prevent a large number of financial mistakes over time. Patterns begin to reveal themselves. Not dramatic patterns, but subtle ones. Repeated behaviors, recurring outcomes, cycles that seem different on the surface, but are identical underneath. And this is where awareness becomes critical. Because once a pattern is recognized, it can be adjusted. But until it is recognized, it repeats. Many people attempt to fix financial issues by changing external factors, new income sources, different strategies, alternative approaches. But if the underlying pattern remains unchanged, the outcome will remain similar. Different situation, same result. So real change does not begin externally. It begins with identifying and restructuring internal patterns. Eventually, a turning point occurs, not because of a major event, but because of a shift in understanding. Instead of reacting to situations, there is a deliberate pause, a moment to evaluate, to consider not just the immediate effect, but the long-term impact. This is where control begins. Not full control, but directional control. And that is enough, because once direction is established, progress becomes measurable, decisions become intentional, and outcomes become more predictable. Not perfect, but increasingly aligned with long-term goals. At this stage, the perspective on money changes completely. It is no longer seen as something external to manage occasionally. It becomes an integrated part of daily decision-making. Every action carries financial implications, not always immediate, but always present. And recognizing that connection changes behavior. Because when awareness increases, impulsiveness decreases. And when impulsiveness decreases, consistency improves. This is where stability begins to form, not from large actions, but from refined daily processes. Another critical shift involves time. Most people interact with money in the present moment. They think about current needs, current desires, and current pressures. But money operates across time. Decisions made today extend into the future, sometimes in ways that are not immediately visible. This creates a gap between action and consequence. And that gap is where most mistakes occur. Because without visible consequences, actions feel harmless. But over time, those actions accumulate. So understanding money requires thinking beyond the present, projecting decisions forward, and evaluating their long-term impact. There is also the element of control. Not absolute control, but structured influence. Many people believe they have control because they are making decisions. But decision-making without structure is not control. It is reaction. True control comes from defined systems, clear processes, consistent tracking, intentional adjustments. These elements create stability. And stability creates confidence. Not emotional confidence, but logical confidence. The kind that comes from knowing your decisions are grounded in structure. As this structure develops, something interesting happens. Complexity becomes manageable. What once felt overwhelming becomes organized. Not because the situation changed, but because the approach improved. And this is where many people misunderstand progress. They expect external changes first, but often, internal clarity comes before external results. And once that clarity is established, results follow more naturally. Not instantly, but consistently so. In the end, the question is not whether money is important. It clearly is. The real question is whether it is understood. Because misunderstanding, it leads to repetition. The same challenges, the same outcomes, the same limitations. But understanding it creates progression. Not dramatic overnight success, but steady, reliable advancement. And that is far more powerful, because it is sustainable. So instead of searching for shortcuts, focus on clarity, focus on structure, focus on consistency, because those are the elements that transform financial outcomes over time. And if this perspective helped you think differently, then you're already moving in the right direction. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, because this is where complex ideas become clear, and where understanding turns into action, step by step.